For decades, one label has defined the global economy: made in China. From the clothes we wear to the phones in our pockets, China became the world's factory. But things are changing. Rising wages, an aging workforce, and trade tensions are forcing China to rethink its role. And now, all eyes are turning to a new frontier: Africa. With the world's youngest population, untapped resources, and billions in Chinese investment, some say Africa could become China's factory of the future. But is this a story of opportunity or dependency? And more importantly, who really stands to benefit? For 20 years, China built the world's most formidable factory floor. Its share of global manufacturing value add jumped from 6% in 2000 to about 31% by 2022, an astonishing rise powered by scale, logistics, and policy. But the model that made Made in China ubiquitous is changing. Labor costs, once China's superpower, have surged. Official data show average manufacturing wages hitting a record high in 2024, more than 4 times higher than a decade earlier in nominal RMB terms. The ILO also documented triple-digit real wage growth in manufacturing in the 2003 to 2013 period, setting the trajectory. Demographics are pushing in the same direction. China's median age is now about 40, and its working-age population peaked around 2014 to 2015 and has begun to shrink. UN projections see a steep decline through 2050. Fewer young workers plus higher wages equals pressure to move low-margin production elsewhere. At the same time, geopolitics has raised the cost of exporting from China. Since 2018, the U.S. has kept imposing tariffs on large swaths of Chinese goods. In 2024 to 2025, Western trade actions expanded to strategic sectors: EVs, batteries, and inputs. The EU approved and implemented additional tariffs on Chinese EVs, with some rates reaching into the 40% plus range. These measures complicate China-based exporting and nudge firms to diversify production footprints. Beijing's answer is a deliberate move up the value chain at home: EVs, solar, lithium batteries, while offshoring labor-intensive, low-margin work to cheaper locations. That's where Africa enters the story. Over the past decade, China has helped finance and build industrial parks and special economic zones across the continent. Early waves backed by China's Commerce Ministry included zones in Ethiopia, Nigeria, Egypt, Mauritius, and Zambia, designed to replicate the Shenzhen playbook for light manufacturing. Put simply, rising costs plus aging at home plus tariff walls abroad are accelerating China's barbell strategy: high-tech at home, low-cost assembly abroad. Africa, with its young workforce and improving logistics, is one of the key destinations for those footloose factories. China keeps its global competitiveness while rewiring supply chains to be China plus Africa rather than China only. Meanwhile, the world gets a preview of a more distributed manufacturing map, with Africa playing a bigger role in the light industry end of China's production ladder. In many ways, Africa today looks like China did 4 decades ago. When China became the world's factory in the 1980s and 1990s, its greatest asset wasn't technology or capital. It was people. Hundreds of millions of young workers poured into new industrial zones, powering decades of export-led growth. Today, Africa is standing at a similar crossroads. The continent has the world's youngest population, with a median age of just 19 years, compared to 40 in China and 39 in the U.S. By 2050, Africa's population is projected to reach 2.5 billion, and the working-age population will be over 1.1 billion, more than China or India. For global manufacturers, that means a vast pool of labor at a fraction of China's cost. In Ethiopia, for example, monthly wages in manufacturing average around $50 to $60, compared to over $600 in China today. This cost gap makes Africa highly attractive for labor-intensive industries like textiles, apparel, shoes, and electronics assembly, the same industries that once made Shenzhen and Guangdong household names. And unlike many aging economies, Africa's workforce is still growing. Every year, more than 10 million young Africans enter the labor market. The challenge, of course, is creating enough jobs. Industrialization offers the clearest path: mass employment, skill building, and income growth. China recognizes this. By relocating factories to Africa, Chinese firms secure cheaper production, while African countries get exactly what they need most: jobs for their youth. If scaled successfully, this could turn a demographic time bomb, youth unemployment, into a demographic dividend. But cheap labor alone doesn't build factories. China knows this better than anyone, which is why, alongside Africa's workforce, Beijing is investing heavily in infrastructure and industrial ecosystems to make manufacturing possible. Since the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013, Africa has become one of its key destinations. By 2021, China had financed or built over 100 major infrastructure projects across Africa, including railways, ports, power plants, and highways. These aren't just prestige projects. They are supply chain arteries designed to link industrial parks inland to export hubs on the coasts. A cornerstone of this effort has been the creation of special economic zones. Modeled on Shenzhen, these are industrial parks where tax incentives, logistics, and utilities are bundled to attract manufacturers. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce officially backed at least 25 cooperation zones in Africa, concentrated in countries like Ethiopia, Nigeria, Egypt, and Zambia. Take Ethiopia as an example. In the early 2010s, Chinese firms established the Eastern Industrial Zone outside Addis Ababa. Soon after, Huajian Group, a major Chinese shoemaker, set up operations there. Within just a few years, the factory was employing thousands of Ethiopian workers and exporting shoes to the U.S. and Europe. At its peak, Huajian was producing 5 million pairs annually in Ethiopia, contributing to a noticeable rise in Ethiopia's manufactured exports. Egypt tells a similar story. The Suez Economic and Trade Cooperation Zone, led by Chinese investors, has grown into one of Africa's most successful SEZs. By 2020, it hosted over 80 companies, producing everything from fiberglass to garments and creating more than 3,500 local jobs. Even in resource-rich countries, China is pushing beyond raw extraction. In Zambia, once seen purely as a copper exporter, Chinese-led zones have introduced value-add smelting and manufacturing. This helps anchor industries locally, instead of shipping raw ore abroad. The numbers are striking. By some estimates, Chinese companies have created over 200,000 direct jobs in African manufacturing and millions more indirectly through supply chains. And while not all zones succeed, some struggle with power shortages or bureaucracy, the trend is clear that China is building the physical and institutional framework for Africa's industrial takeoff. In short, Africa isn't just a cheap labor pool. It's being deliberately structured into China's global production network. Roads, railways, power plants, and SEZs are the scaffolding of a new industrial landscape, one designed with Chinese capital, Chinese know-how, and Chinese strategy. But this labor and infrastructure are just the foundation. Africa's resources and market size are the crown jewels in this story. They explain why China is so determined to integrate Africa into its industrial orbit. Africa holds about 30% of the world's mineral reserves, including the raw materials most critical to modern industry. The Democratic Republic of Congo alone produces over 70% of the world's cobalt, a key input for batteries and electric vehicles. Countries like Zimbabwe and Namibia are rich in lithium, another essential component for EVs and consumer electronics. Rare earths, platinum, manganese, oil, and natural gas are spread across the continent. For China, which dominates the global EV and battery industries, securing access to these resources is strategic. Instead of shipping raw ores thousands of miles, Beijing is encouraging local processing and light manufacturing in Africa. This not only reduces transport costs, but also ties Africa into Chinese-led supply chains. A Chinese-built battery plant in the DRC or a textile mill in Ethiopia ensures that value is added closer to the source, with China still controlling the capital and technology. But resources are only half the equation. The other half is Africa's consumer market. By 2050, Africa's population will reach 2.5 billion, making it the fastest-growing consumer base in the world. The African Development Bank projects a middle class of over 500 million people by mid-century, demanding everything from affordable smartphones to cars, appliances, and housing. For Chinese firms, producing inside Africa makes perfect sense. It helps them serve African consumers directly while also exporting globally from a low-cost base. Trade agreements make this even more attractive. The African Continental Free Trade Area, launched in 2021, creates the world's largest single market by number of countries. Also, deals like the U.S. African Growth and Opportunity Act offer duty-free access to American markets for goods made in Africa. In other words, Africa offers China what no other region can: the full cycle of industrial growth, from raw materials to ready-made markets. When China looks to Africa, the benefits are clear. For Africa, however, the benefits are just as significant, at least on paper. Every year, the continent needs to create 10 to 12 million new jobs to keep pace with its booming youth population. Chinese factories, even if they offer low wages by global standards, provide structured employment that many countries desperately need. Beyond jobs, this is Africa's chance to move beyond the old model of exporting raw materials and importing finished goods. With Chinese partnerships, African nations can begin producing textiles, electronics, and machinery on their own soil, adding value before goods are shipped abroad. The infrastructure China builds to support these industries, from Kenya's standard gauge railway to power plants in Nigeria, doesn't just help foreign companies. It also lowers the cost of doing business for local farmers, traders, and entrepreneurs. There's also the question of skills and technology transfer. Working in these factories exposes African workers to technical know-how, management practices, and access to global supply chains. Over time, this experience can seed local entrepreneurship, raising the possibility of homegrown industries competing on the world stage. And by producing under trade agreements that favor African-made goods, countries gain easier entry into the U.S. and European markets, opportunities that would have been difficult to seize without Chinese investment. So, at its core, the relationship seems mutually beneficial. China gets a new, cheaper production base and secure access to critical resources. Africa gets jobs, infrastructure, and an accelerated path to industrialization. The real question, though, is whether this partnership will remain balanced or whether Africa will once again find itself trapped in dependency, this time not on the West, but on Beijing.